At this meeting of the Economic Development Committee, I'm joined by my colleague, the Honorable Monica Rodriguez.
Oh, very well done. Very nice.
We have an action-packed agenda for you. Don't let the non-curse words fool you. It's still action-packed. But let's begin by calling us to order, Mr. Clerk.
Yes, and we do not have any, we only have one card on item number 2 and no cards for general public comment.
All right, let's go quickly. That's no, I'm just kidding. Just
Close general public comment.
we'll close general comment, and we're going to close the multiple agenda public comment items unless there's an objection.
Nope.
Seeing no objection, things are closed. We're going to. We do have a speaker for item 2. Looks like Romero Malibu. And I apologize for botching your name. Would you pronounce it for us, please?
Romero Malvo.
Vero Malvo. Yes, ma'am. Floor is yours for 1 minute.
Good afternoon. I'm a resident of Leimert Park, and I'm here to support the motion. Our area, within 8 blocks, we have 3 metro stations, so that makes us practically all TOC. So the alternatives out there for housing are multiple, but a community is more than housing. And so I applaud the city in soliciting developer interest in something other than housing that might be jobs and that might make the community more functional. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Malvo, for your comments. Okay, that's going to close public comment. If there are no objections, we're going to take items 2, 3, and 4 on consent. No objections, that will be the order. Item 5 through 20 are bond oversight, a report on bond oversight funds. Do we need to call all of them? Or?
No.
Okay, great. Well, let's just take item 5 through 20 and ask the CRA board to come up, CAO or the CLA, come up as we're joined by Mr. Joe Busciano. Items through 5 through 20 are all CRA bond oversight reports, one nature or another. We'd like to get just a little clarification on what's being approved. I think this is a routine procedural process, but let's hear from our experts.
Good afternoon, Daisy Hernandez with the Economic and Workforce Development Department.
Okay, and you're joined by?
Joined by
Nathan Holmes with the City Administrative Office.
Oscar Ishko with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst.
Well, I'd like to thank and welcome you all. Can you give the committee an update on where we are in terms of spending all of the CRA bond funding and what deadlines are coming up? And you may.
Well, Chair, in regards to the allocation of all the CRA excess bond proceeds, we are now 100% fully allocated. Every council district has allocated their funding towards eligible projects. With these 15, 16 items that are before you today are the projects that are going through the process of getting council approval to spend the money on those projects. So it all starts with an initial council motion that starts the process, and then that instructs the EWD to work with the CAO's office and the implementing departments to gather the information needed to be provided in the report that basically lays out what the project is about, what the money is going to be spent on, its eligibility, environmental, all those things are included.
Is it unusual at this point to have all offices in compliance, or are we sometimes dragging some, trying to get them in?
Entered into
what are the consequences if they're not in?
The consequences if they're not in is the funds would be subject to be swept back by the CRA. We have a deadline of January 15th, 2020 to fully encumber all excess bond proceeds. So we will have to prove to the CRA that all those funds have been encumbered, and that encumbrance will be proven by council having approved the funding and the city having entered into contractual obligations for those funds, whether they be with private entities or with interdepartmental, workforce projects. Outside of the January 15, 2020 date, the city has until January 15, 2025 to spend the funds. So that's the second major deadline in this process. So.
Okay. Members, any questions?
Yes. So my understanding is there were additional allocations that were just recently made available, and so those still need to be encumbered. Is that accurate?
So we do have interest earnings that the bond money has earned, and I believe we're in the process of encumbering those funds as well.
Okay.
So most of the reports that are going to be coming forth are going to be including the interest earnings as well.
And having anticipated that the interest would be building on many projects, some of the final projects that were approved for each council office, we included a statement in there that it include all earned interest. So we were automatically capturing that interest buildup. So in most, if not all, council districts, there are existing projects that are already going to capture the interest.
Okay. Mr. Busciano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question, unless I missed it, the report doesn't mention how the funds will be used or in each of the project area. Can you detail that for us?
Which specific project?
Yeah, on 20. I'm sorry, I'm referring to 20.
Oh.
I know we've taken all of them on the on oversight. Thanks, Marissa.
Oh, yes, this is a report that we put together and specifying and identifying what project areas have earned on the bond proceeds.
Right.
And this is what we did is our financial management unit went and did a breakdown of where the interest earnings would be allocated based on the project area. And there's an attachment to the report that shows the breakdown of where the funds will be allocated.
Oh, I see the attachment. Okay, I see the attachment.
And Mr. Ishko, you can add to this, but where possible, we try to add the interest into an existing project. So, for example, in CD15, we're working on adding some of the interest into a project we're working on right now.
Got it.
And as for some of the project areas where there's interest left over but no existing project, we're working on what we can do about spending that money. And
Right, so that was the other question. If the project hasn't been identified, then who makes that decision on where the monies will go?
that is to be determined. We know we're going to have leftover money, whether it's contingency funds that weren't spent or just project, cost savings. And so that's an ongoing discussion of, because we're not going to be able to get every penny accounted for right now. And so potentially we will have some money at the end, and that's something that we're discussing.
And if at any time there are funds available, it is at the discretion of each council district to determine how that money is going to be spent on, what it's going to be spent on, as long as it's an eligible project.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Actually, I have one more question. So just so that I have a better understanding, so you're suggesting that, like in the contingency, for example, if there are remaining funds, at what point, what is the risk if it's not expended, even though it was identified for encumbrance for a specific project? What then happens to those additional resources? Will we be free to reprogram them for other uses, or because the deadline for the programming is now, right? So how would that work?
Currently, that's a discussion that the city will need to have with the former redevelopment agency.
Okay.
Our understanding as of right now is that we will be able to reprogram funds because these funds are going to have been committed. But again, we need clarification from them to make sure that that's going to be acceptable at the point where we need to reprogram.
Okay.
No, I was just going to say that the current bond expenditure agreement is silent on that piece. So meaning that if a situation were to change past the January 2020 date and funds become unobligated for a project and we now want to reobligate to something else, Right, we think we can do it. We don't see a reason why we shouldn't be able to do it, as long as we spend the money before 2025.
Well, right, and I guess that's what I'm getting at, is that so long as we don't hit that one threshold, because if the way we're programming the dollars and with the expenditure schedule, that if we then find ourselves with reserves or additional money that went unspent, that we would have the capacity to reprogram, likely and hopefully before that 2025 deadline, correct?
That is our understanding, but as Daisy Hernandez said, we're going to confirm that with the CRA.
Terrific.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so just to restate, I know that you're working closely with all the council offices, making sure that projects are identified and resources identified for each project, so it's important. Any other questions, members? Without objection, I'm going to move that we approve the recommendations for items 5 through 20. Without objection, that will be the order.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Madam City Attorney.
No, CAO.
Oh, I'm CAO, I'm sorry.
Jackie Wagner with the CAO's office. We'd like to request that all of the items that are actual reports from the CRA BOC committee be sent forthwith to the council and be agendized as soon as possible so that we can work towards making those deadlines that you mentioned.
Okay,
Thank you.
so forthwith, as requested by the CAO. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, what's up next, Mr. Clerk?
We have one more item on our agenda. That's item number 1, which is a motion from Councilmembers Price and Krikorian relative to recommendations on how to implement a city legacy business program.
All right. City legacy business programs are designed to address the issue that many long-standing businesses have in a community of being displaced. We recognize the value of businesses that have been around for a long time, a lot of history, a lot of legacy, providing good services and employment. Some cities have taken steps to assist these types of businesses in Buenos Aires, Barcelona, London, and most recently San Francisco. So can we get some folks up from UWDD? Or no? Come on down. All right, the dynamic duo. Appreciate your presence. Just some general questions about these types of programs. I know we're still doing a lot of research and trying to make sure it's tailored to our situation here in the city of LA, but do you mind sort of reviewing how these programs operate and what we might look forward to?
I think in some regards, given that the motion was recently introduced and we're to work with CLA and I think other departments, will be able to answer very specifically within the coming weeks. However, I think as the city evaluates or considers a legacy program for businesses, we need to be clear about defining legacy business, certainly, and the importance of the legacy business to any particular geography, whether it's in the 15th or any district throughout the city. Moreover, the benefits of legacy certification, certainly retaining the business, whatever goods and services they're providing that the community has otherwise been benefiting from. It's just stressing that. And ultimately, I think funding. Funding is going to be critical. Most importantly, you mentioned San Francisco. I believe that matter went up for vote, and there were certain dollars allocated to help subsidize potential displacement of businesses that might otherwise not be able to afford where they are. So those are things that we'll need to consider. We'll certainly look abroad. You mentioned those cities and the countries elsewhere, and we'll evaluate certainly what's happening in Frisco since it's a little closer to home. But I think as we consider legacy businesses, we need to be very focused with respect to our approach so that we're addressing their needs and certainly the intention, if you will, of this dais and what it is that you all are seeking to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, members?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Price, for your motion. I thought it was a very interesting concept. I hadn't been familiar with the concept before, but to your point, I recognize the potential slippery slope that we can get into in terms of city resources and having them designated for businesses that, what is that criteria and what makes you eligible, because everybody could then be picking and choosing their favorite spot that doesn't necessarily have, it's how we define it and how we define what that legacy is. I would look at Placito Olvera as being obviously a critical part of Los Angeles. Does that mean all of the existing lessees and tenants of that space would be beneficiaries of it as a legacy? Is it the Pink's hot dog? Is it whatever? But it needs to be very, very specifically defined, and I'm interested in learning more about how they've defined that, those protocols, if you will, for eligibility, because I see the potential for it becoming problematic. And when you're talking about city resources and supplementing,
Scarce city resources.
right, and you're talking about to private sector, essentially, the preservation of private sector business and industry. You just have to be very thoughtful about the implementation of that. So really interested in learning more about what you find in your due diligence of looking into these programs.
Thank you. And just sort of tag on that a little bit, one of the definitions, if you will, would certainly be legacy, and inherent in legacy is time. How long has the business been in existence at the same
Right.
location? And so on the one hand, there would be likely a threshold, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, 25, 30, and then as it relates to the funding, not that timeline is the extent of the due diligence, but setting aside that grouping, then I think likely once we get to the funding, it'll likely be first come, first served. I think in some ways that might determine, not only how resources are to be spent, but what resources can be spent. Otherwise, there's a mad dash for cash. And so we need to be mindful of that.
Right.
We'll consider not only San Francisco, but others as mentioned, and get back to you all just as soon as possible.
Okay, great. We think it's an interesting concept, and one that can potentially support, local businesses, as we've been trying to do in a variety of ways. This is just one more way of doing it. Okay, thank you. We look forward to that report about 90 days,
At least.
at least.
Definitely, yes.
All right, thank you.
90 days.
Appreciate your earnestness. Thank you. Ms. Clerk, I'd like to go back, reconsider items 3 and 4,
And also item number 2 as well?
and item 2, 3, 4, or just 3, 4? Yeah.
Okay, so item 3.
Okay, 3, 4?
Sure. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Call the vote on it? Yeah.
Yeah, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay, approved, double approved. Mr. Clerk, what else is before us at this time?
The desk is clear.
Desk is clear. No adjourning motions accepted. Thank you for your attendance and your presence.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.